how does an empathetic leader deal with non-empathetic employees who are good at their job but spread negative energy within the company?
To answer this question, I mean, it happens a lot that there are good, empathetic people who have to deal with unpleasant people who are not empathetic but are top performers all the time. And the way to deal with that really is to try and draw them out, to ask them more questions, to get them to talk more and to try and share their feelings, because then you start to learn more about them and maybe they start to relax a little bit. I mean, people who are not empathetic are usually insecure about something inside. And so you just have to draw them out, and it takes time. You know, it's not something that can happen in one conversation. It can take months, even years, depending upon the person. But that's really how you can start to draw them in and have them feel more relaxed and confident with you and trust you.
Hi, Sabrina. The question from Team 2 is, as we could see on your blog, Horn Strategy, there is a blog post called Planning Magic, the Hocus Pocus of Focus. And we were wondering if you could explain the term Hocus Pocus of Focus a bit more.
Yeah, the reason why I said hocus pocus is, I mean, because it kind of rhymes, and it made for a good section in my book also. But the meaning behind it is like hocus pocus means magic, you know. And so the issue with being so focused, right, is that you only see what's in front of you. You don't see what's coming down the road. And if you only look on the opposite side of what's coming down the road, then you miss what's right in front of you. And that's why I call it the hocus pocus, because it's kind of tricky. You have to, in planning, you have to somehow always kind of keep your eye on what's coming down the road while you're managing what's right in front of you. And that's a very delicate balancing act for anyone to do, really. But it's extremely important so that you don't make mistakes and that you avoid potential threats down the road.
From the point of view of business ethics, how often do managers turn to their own interests during the crisis and not to the interests of the company? And who actually controls the plans for the crisis in the company?
Well, this is a really important question. We have seen a lot of leaders, when they manage a crisis, look only to protect themselves. So in the example of the Boeing Air Max disaster, the CEO only really looked to protect himself and was not very transparent about really what was going on. Similarly, other CEOs like Elizabeth Holmes, who was the former CEO of Theranos, she clearly only looked to protect herself through the crisis and still is. But the best leaders know that if they've made a mistake, or even if there's something that's happening to the company, that they have to defend the company first, that it is all about the employees and the customers and stakeholders, the investors, right? The best leader will realize that it's much better to admit a mistake and to recover from that than it is to lie or shove it under the rug and then be exposed later for not being truthful. And in terms of who develops crisis plans, it really varies depending upon the company and the size of the company. Large companies have corporate communications departments with a person who looks after that full time. Smaller companies like startups, they don't have that. And then it's up to the CEO or maybe the chief operating officer to advise the CEO to say, here's what we need to do. So it really depends upon the size of the company, the type of company it is, also if the company is publicly traded or private. So, it's really differs.
Have you ever faked it in your life until you achieved something? And what prompted you to educate people on this topic?
Yes, in my book, I wrote about how I faked it a few times, personally as a young person, then as an inexperienced CEO, as a CEO under pressure, when times were tough. But I never faked it till I made it. I mean, it always bombed. It always failed because it wasn't the truth. It was an exaggeration or a minimization or even a lie. And so I never was successful when I faked it. And that's what in part prompted me to write this book, because these days, I think so many people think that fake it till you make it is acceptable. And it's sort of like actually a reason to not be truthful and to just kind of pull it off. And so I wrote about this with my career and my experiences to help other people find ways to not fake it and to be successful with hard work and with integrity, just by itself.
One of your articles is called "The Worst Time to Develop a Crisis Plan is During a Crisis." What if the crisis that occurs is nothing as we experienced before, if we could not prepare for it?
I mean, this is an important question, right? Nobody thought we would have a global pandemic. How do you prepare for something you've never experienced? It's very difficult. But we do live in a world where the unimaginable seems to be happening. There could be a huge cyber attack on our financial systems that could cripple all business that's done online, for example, and then we have to go back to cash. You have to imagine, how would you operate in a situation like that? You cannot know ever exactly how you would operate in any kind of crisis, but you would do yourself well to at least think about it and have a conversation, like maybe we should have extra cash on hand. Maybe if there is a natural disaster or, God forbid, an act of terrorism, then how would we operate without that piece of the business? Where would we move things to, right? And so it is unimaginable. And of course, when something like that actually happens, you have to roll with it in real time. But at least you will feel better that you considered, okay, here's what we should think about. And maybe we should just do this now and put this thing and set it aside, because maybe someday we might need it. That's really my only message there.
Can a person truly fake it to make it, or is it just a psychological illusion?
No, I mean, I think there are some people for whom faking it is like a way of life. And, these are people who are sociopaths or psychopaths, right? There's something that's gone wrong there, and these are the people who end up in prison and who have committed fraud. And when you fake it all the time, it eats away at you, and you become that, right? But that is like the smallest, 0.5% of the people, who do that. Most people just sort of play around with it and don't make it because they realize it doesn't work.
What is your opinion the key to making it?
There's not one key. I mean, it is many, many factors to being successful, to making it. It is having a good business plan with a good market opportunity, a value proposition where you really have identified a problem that you uniquely can solve, right? But it's also being able to execute on that plan, and to pivot when things change, right? But whatever is happening around you, the key to being successful is always operating with integrity and honesty, and not getting caught up with ego or being under pressure to do something and then doing something that's not right for you, right? There's so many factors to being successful, but integrity is always at the heart of it.
If crisis scenarios are determined beforehand, do you think that it is possible that the employers will follow that scenario without trying to adapt the plan according to the real crisis? That could happen purely because it is easier for people to imitate what they practice for a crisis, meaning that they would follow the old plan while not paying attention that it may not be well enough applicable for the real crisis, because every crisis is actually hard to predict, in our opinion. Thank you.
It's a fair question. And I wrote in my book too, right? Like every crisis, when it is actually playing out in real time, is different than how you imagined it. It is impossible to write a plan that perfectly addresses a crisis as it's happening. What you do have is a blueprint or a template from which you have some basic things to operate from. Who will be your spokesperson? Maybe some information that you have at the ready about who you will communicate with, the phone numbers of your staff, key customers, your board of directors, right? What is the chain of command to communicating in a crisis? And then, ideas about what you will do. But when it's actually happening, it may be a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and some of this and some of that. So it's not meant to be like a box and that's it, right? It is just to give you a little bit more of a sense of security, knowing that, okay, you kind of thought this through before, and that you have a chain of command in terms of who will take the lead on which topics, right? And that you have a way of reaching people in a bad situation.
In case we have an imposter syndrome, how do we know that we are experiencing it, and how do we get conscious about it?
So imposter syndrome is a very popular topic. And I think the key to dealing with it is knowing that it is real and that it exists. And so how do you know that you have it? First of all, it affects mostly women and minorities, overachievers, people who want to move up and be leaders, but it also affects men. And it can happen when you're young and when you're older. It can really affect anybody. And it happens when you find yourself in new environment, new surroundings, like you just got promoted or you got a new job and you're not working with anybody you worked with before. It's all new people on your email, new people in meetings, and everybody's checking each other out. And you wonder, like, what do they think of me? And you start to feel anxiety, like, am I not good enough? Or am I able to do what they think of me? And those are the signs that maybe you suffer from that. And the key is to, at that moment, to kind of see, okay, it's normal. Everybody experiences it. And two things, there are many things you can do, but two ideas. Look at everything you have achieved, like literally take your resume and read it back to yourself and record it, right? And play it back, because it really validates that you actually did achieve all of these things and that you did earn this new position, right? And that you're not a fraud. And then secondly, the thing to do is to realize that you are not alone. You are always in a work environment, part of some kind of team. And so when people say, oh yeah, well, you're the new expert and you know all this, and you're like, no, right? The key is to say, listen, I need your help. We're a team, and I will look to you so that we can be successful together. And using the we word kind of levels the playing field and helps draw people in, right? To make them work with you, not just sort of sit back and, put all the pressure on you. So those are two tips.
Is pre-planning for as such as possible crisis that may never happen a waste of time and therefore company resources, or is it a smart and ethical strategy?
No, a lot of startups, young companies take this view that crisis planning is a waste of time. They don't have time for that other than to build product, get customers, and raise money. But there are also very big companies that know they have to do it. They just check the box, but they don't really do a good job. They don't have a template. They don't think things through, or it's not sophisticated enough for the type of company it is. I think it is a matter of degree, right? If you realize that it's important, you have to decide for yourself how much you're going to put behind it. This is an exercise that a couple of people can do over a couple of weeks, or it could be the CEO sitting down on a Saturday afternoon to sketch something out, right? But it is never a waste of time, because somewhere along the journey of a leader, there will be a crisis. And even if what you wrote down is for one specific type of event that may never happen, you will remember, okay, we put together this process where I will speak with the CFO and the COO, we will contact our employees, and these are the things we're going to put in action. Even just having thought through that will be useful at some point. So it's never a waste of time.
Do you have any advice for people who are naturally very sensitive but still want to achieve high managerial positions that bring great responsibilities and stressful situations such as firing people?
Well, I guess I would say a person who is sensitive is probably the best suited for those situations, because a sensitive person has more empathy and may handle difficult situations like firing somebody in a more appropriate way. Now, that being said, that kind of stuff is hard, and you have to be resilient and you have to be tough. But there's a difference between being sensitive and kind, right? You can be sensitive and kind and still be resilient and tough and be a good leader. So, don't associate being sensitive with being soft, right? It is, I consider myself a sensitive person. And I learned that in order to be a leader, being sensitive and empathetic are incredibly important skills to running a good business where people want to work for you, right? So I think that that's an important skill.
Hello, I have a question. What would be the best way for leadership to explicitly show to their employees that they are willing to create and maintain a healthy work environment?
I think it's a great question. Just two things. I mean, it's saying and doing. So doing is the easy part. In fact, putting together mental wellness programs, personal days, sessions for coaching, for professional development, an environment where you can speak your mind, right? Those are all things you can do, but you also have to say and be that kind of leader. Like, it can't just be BS, Anybody can hire a coach or put in a nice healthcare wellness program, or but you have to be that kind of person authentically. You have to really believe it, because if what you're saying, what you say that comes out of your mouth, right, and you have a total disregard for somebody's mental wellness or a healthy work environment, that's going to be in direct conflict, right, with these programs you set up, and they will know that you're faking it, right? So you have to be that. You can't just pretend.
How important and difficult is to create a good team of people who will go through every segment of crisis, and how do you achieve the best communication among the team members?
The team is everything, right? It's the people who help you get through a crisis, not just the plan, right? I think in a crisis, you have to over communicate. At the risk of being redundant, it's super important because in a crisis, people are anxious, sometimes afraid, and they don't hear everything or they don't process what you're saying, right, about what you need to do or what's happening, because it's overwhelming. And so the key is to over communicate through multiple forms of communication with each other, whether that's email, phone, video, Zoom, multiple times through multiple channels. This is super important. And I think in terms of the team, you want to have a team that sort of hits all the vectors of your business. So if you make a product, right, it should be the head of manufacturing or product. It should be the head of sales, certainly the CEO and the CFO. Depending upon the crisis, maybe your head of HR, of human resources. It depends on, what the crisis is. And so in your planning, you would plot that, right? Who would you need to involve if situation A were to happen? So hopefully that answers the question.
How do we deal with the situation when we become a leader at a younger age and older and more experienced co-workers act as if we didn't deserve it because of our age?
Well, I can really relate to that because when I was CEO at 29 years old, I had clients and employees who were much older than me. And they were sort of testing me or talking down to me or trying to prove me wrong. And you have to really be careful there, right? Because you don't want to become defensive. You just need to be smart and confident. And gradually, over time, you win them over. But the other suggestion I have is to draw them in, to invite them to work with you, right? Because they have this attitude about you, right? But if you collaborate with them and say, I really want your point of view here. I really need your collaboration in this work. I don't know how to do this. And probably because you don't. And say, I really need your expertise here. Let's get together so we can talk about it. And then that way, again, you draw them out, you build and establish trust, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time. It took me years, 2 to 3 years, to get a person I hired who was 20 years older than me at the time. And I also had clients who thought, like, what does she know about this? Well, I took it upon myself to just show them that I was smart and that I could listen to their point of view, and gradually you win them over.
Here is a question for 6 planning tips. Is it possible to conduct quality and successful planning if one of the steps is skipped?
I mean, yes, it depends on which step. And it depends on what you're planning. If part of your plan is putting on an event and you skip the step of the resources that it will take to pull it off, then it probably won't work as well as if you had thought that through. There are different steps to planning something, and you should consider each step and just how much do you need to really think about that given what the goal is, right? The outcome that you want to achieve. It will be different for each situation. But if you leave something out, then, it could fail. Like if you don't think about what something will cost, and then you're not managing your expenses, you'll go over budget and people will be very upset. So like everything has a different weight. Do you know what I mean?
The question my team proposed is, when setting expectations in terms of an organization entering a market, is it relatively inadequate to set a higher level of expectation while uncertain?
When you're entering a new market, I'm not exactly sure, like, if you're entering a market and you have a proof of concept, a minimum viable product, right? Then you can show that it works in certain situations and the problem that it solves and how it's viable, right? Because you have some customers who accepted the proof of concept works, right? Somebody can say it's okay. And so then you have to set expectations that are in line with that. You can't say, oh, like, yeah, it can do all these things and, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, you have to stay real with, like, here's what we know it can do today. This is what our customers have told us who've looked at it, right? And while we're not in production and, yet, we believe that longer term, it may be able to do these additional things. But today, this is what it does. The vision for the long term is perhaps this. But you can't just only say it's going to be like all these things. Like, you have to build credibility by acknowledging what it can do today and what it could possibly be down the road a bit.
Could it be said that one could not progress in both professional and personal avenues without first faking it, and that the concept of faking it could be used as a tool to develop skills and abilities that we may not have known that we possess?
I think there's, on the spectrum of faking it, there is something called acting as if, which is perfectly acceptable. It's part of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Where you practice the behaviors that you wish you had. Like if you don't feel confident and you are preparing to change jobs or you're going for an interview, you practice the behaviors that you wish you could exude, right? And that's perfectly healthy. It's actually kind of where that fake it till you make it phrase kind of came from. Similarly, like power posing or dressing black or to wear red to feel confident, right? That's all fine. And it can help you actually be more successful. But you cross the line when you are essentially twisting the truth, exaggerating the facts, minimizing certain things, right? And you're basically doing and saying things at another person's expense for personal gain. So, I mean, it depends on how you're using the term and what you're doing. But I have found that acting as if is perfectly fine, but lying about the truth or twisting the facts is not.
Is it possible for leaders to transfer their sympathy into empathy?
That's a really interesting question. I had to think about that. Sympathy and empathy are often confused with each other. Sympathy is when you feel bad for a person that is experiencing something terrible, like the death of a family member, but you have no idea what it feels like. You can't put yourself in their shoes, but you feel for them. Empathy is when you put yourself in someone else's shoes, and because you understand that situation and you can relate to them and do not just say things, but do things that can improve their situation, right? So as an empathetic leader, I can understand that somebody may really be having trouble working with a team member, or this customer is really being mean to them. And so I can put myself in their shoes and say, let's change this process to make it better for you, or let's get rid of this customer because they're not a good customer, right? Sympathy is when you can't change the situation. But you can sympathize that a family member passed away, but you can't change how they feel, right? So those are the two differences. Now, to answer the question, I think in certain cases you can turn sympathy into empathy, but it depends on what it's about. You know, you can feel bad for a person that they got fired and put yourself in their shoes and maybe help them get a job. But it depends on the situation.
Why we need to fake it until we make it when the circumstances sometimes are not really encouraging us to be a better person or to be ourselves?
Well, I mean, I guess that's up to the individual. I think you should always try to be your best self, whether you're encouraged to be so or not. You have, one life to live. It's yours. You have to put your head down on the pillow at night and be okay living with yourself to know that, you did the best job that you could have, or that, you didn't. And, that bothers you maybe. Like that's up to each person, to strive to be the best and do the best that they can, regardless of the circumstances.
Is there a situation where fake it until you make it is actually useful? If you notice fakers around us, is it better to fake it or be honest with a chance of being excluded?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in certain situations, again, like when you're under peer pressure or in a corporate environment. I was once invited to a golf tournament with other executives who, I really wanted to win over and to do business with. And, I couldn't hit a ball to save my life. And so I realized, like, if I fake it, I'm going to just totally embarrass myself.
You will drop the bomb.
Yeah, I mean, it would exclude me ultimately anyway, because they would think I'm an idiot for lying, and so it's better to actually just say, you know what, I don't know how to hit a ball to save my life, but I'll meet you at the bar afterwards. Or I'll come with you and I'll provide the cocktails so that you can still be a part of it. I always think that it's better to be honest. It's how you deliver the message too, right? It's, depending on the situation, making it funny or finding a way to participate or to be included in a more elegant way than just like totally outright lying. So.